All right, you ready? I'm ready.
I'm ready. Yeah, let's rock and roll.
Okay, that made me laugh there.
What, the reference to rock and roll?
All right.
Okay, let's be like Mozart.
Let's let rip.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Good Robot Andy's season.
Okay, I'm glad you stopped then. Because I'm hosting this week, listener.
Oh,
and that
must
means
mean that I'm well prepared for some topic.
Yes, that means that it's not a movie topic this week. It's a tech topic. That's the one you've all been waiting for.
A tech topic.
That's probably why you're not listening anymore, listener, because we've started talking about things that are not films. But anyway, we're playing on regardless because we think you like it.
To be fair, we've got as much feedback.
Well, exactly.
On these episodes as the others.
We have nobody to tell us that they don't like it, so we might as well do it anyway.
I think that's just universal acceptance from our audience.
I think it is. Yes, I think you're right. But anyway, tonight's thing is going to be, Andy, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about what is Linux.
What is Linux? So we're going to be talking about when it was made, who made it, why they did it, and where it's used.
It is.
Yeah, where it's used, what it is.
What it is.
In what way is it better than other things that can run on computers? In what way is it worse than other things that can run on computers?
Yeah, and why do you care?
Yeah, so go.
First of all, you have to say who you are.
Oh, yes, I do, yes.
You're not really a pro at this yet.
No, I know, I'm terrible at this, really. My name's Andy Cockerill, and this is...
And my name is Andy Balaam.
And his name is Andy Balaam.
I'm the tech expert.
Yeah, Andy's the tech expert, and I'm not.
Yeah.
And Andy's going to tell us all about Linux. Go.
All right. So let's start off with how you say it.
Okay.
So how you say it is Linux.
You don't say Linux.
You don't say Linux, you say Linux.
Why is that?
The reason why is because the person who wrote it says that's how you say it.
Okay.
And it's kind of a play on his name, and he's called Linus.
So why isn't it Linux?
It is.
Oh, it is.
But his name is spelled how some people would pronounce it Linus.
Yes.
But he's called Linus because he's from Finland, and
okay.
That's how they pronounce that name. That's my understanding.
Okay, so
that's the most important stuff cleared up.
It's called that, and it's named after him.
Yeah, he named it after himself.
Okay, and when did he first unleash Linux upon the world?
Oh wow! Should I have done some research?
Yeah, I think you should have done actually. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember the date, but it was about 20 years ago.
Was it really that long ago?
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Wow. Okay. I think we'll probably come back for a fact-checking session at the end, but let's plough on regardless.
Maybe we should do that. Yes. All right. So I want to talk about what it is, because the problem is the thing we're talking about, the thing that was written by Linus Torvalds.
Yes,
that's his name. Is not really what people think of. Well, it's not. It's often not what people mean when they say Linux.
Okay.
So let's try and talk a little bit about what Linux is and what the various things people might mean when they talk about it.
Okay.
If you're new to this topic, it's probably pretty confusing, but you've probably heard that there's this thing called Linux, and it's part of this thing called open source or free software, which we'll probably do a whole podcast about.
We will do, but just give us a quick rundown on what open source means.
So open source free software is basically software that is available for anyone to use and change. It's not locked up by one particular company.
Okay.
And Linux is a good example of it. It's stuff that you can have running on your computer. You don't have to pay anyone for it. You can download it. And it was originally written by a load of volunteers. It's these days it's funded by lots of big companies, and there's also volunteers involved with it. But
okay. So big companies fund it, and why do they fund it? What's in it for them?
Well, because it's useful for them, and let's talk about what it is and what it does, and then hopefully it'll become clear why it might be useful.
Okay, go for it.
So when you're talking about Linux, if someone says to you, "Oh, you should put Linux on your computer," then they're not really talking about. I mean, they're talking about something which contains this thing, which is really called Linux. But actually, they're talking about a much bigger system, which has got loads and loads of software programs in it that do all kinds of things. And that's normally called a Linux distribution. So that will have stuff like an email client in it, and a web browser like Firefox, and a word processor and all that stuff. And you would call that a Linux distribution. But basically what that is a whole collection of programs that run on your computer. And the thing that you have to understand about, if you're running Linux, what that means is that you haven't got Windows. So if you don't know what Windows is, it's the program that runs all the other programs on your computer.
Okay. So Linux is
another one of them.
Linux is an operating system.
Exactly. So yeah, the name that we give to the program that looks after your computer and runs all the other stuff is an operating system. Another one you might have heard of is Mac OS X.
Yes.
Which is what you've got if you've got it on your Mac. And another one, by the way, that you might have heard of is Android.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
So Android's an operating system that runs on your phone or your tablet normally. And actually, Android is actually based on Linux underneath. So they don't make a big fuss about it, but actually Google used Linux to build Android. So underneath Android, there's Linux on that as well. But that won't have all the other stuff that you normally talk about if you have Linux on your computer. It's just the operating system in the middle. Okay. So I don't know whether I made that clearer or less clear.
No, I think it is clear. I think that Linux is an operating system. It runs on various different types of device in some form or another. And in
what does it do?
Well, yeah, what does it do? Yeah.
What does it do?
Yeah,
it's quite hard to explain. It does things like make sure that your graphics card works, or it knows how to talk to disk drives and sound cards. So the program that's responsible for understanding the sound information that's coming in from my headset and turning that into information that gets written on the hard drive, that is dealt with by the operating system and specifically this thing called the operating system kernel.
Yes,
which is what is kind of properly.
And when you say
called
kernel,
Linux.
What are you talking about there? Are you talking about someone with a uniform and a rank and an insignia, or
yes, I am. Yeah,
something else. You are. So it's a kernel.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm talking about.
Does the rest of the operating system say, "Good morning, Colonel," and they salute to it in the morning?
Yeah, I mean that's as technical as my explanation is going to get.
Okay, listener. What Andy's actually referring to is a kernel like the kernel of a nut.
That's right. It's spelt like that.
Yeah.
Well. And what it is it's the bit in the middle which does the real work, like talking to the graphics card and the disk drives and all that stuff. And that is what is properly called Linux. So when you're talking about a Linux distribution, that's all the programs that you might get. And when you get Linux distribution, you get all this free stuff, all these programs for free. Often they're very good. We use Linux programs for recording this podcast, or I use it for editing it, things like that.
Yes.
There's some really good software, all available completely free. It's shocking. When you first find out about it, you can't believe you didn't know about it before. Anyway, I went off on a sidetrack to talk about what a Linux distribution is. But anyway, right in the middle of that is this thing called the kernel, which is the actual operating system. And what that does is just sort of controls the computer. So it talks to the hardware and it runs the other programs and things like that. Okay,
so in the same way that if you're running Microsoft Windows on your computer, Linux does a similar thing to that.
Exactly.
That Windows does.
But that could actually be a confusing thing to say, because a lot of people I've spoken to don't know what Windows does, and they mix it up with Microsoft Office.
Ah.
So we have to be sure that we distinguish between those things.
Okay, we must absolutely be sure about that then.
Yeah. So Microsoft Office, which is just a program that has a word processor and a spreadsheet and things like that.
Yeah.
And Microsoft Windows is the thing you don't really notice when your computer's turning on. And it says things like you need to download updates, or the login screen. Stuff
or it
like
has
that.
a blue screen of death.
Yeah, exactly. When it crashes all the time, the thing that's responsible for that is Windows.
Mm-hmm. Not Office.
Similarly,
although it might be Office.
It could be Office too. Yeah. So it's the screen you see when you turn on the computer, and the login screen, and it's the same with Mac OS 10. You know, the screen you see when it's turning on, and it's showing you the different things it's loading, and it gives you a login screen. All of that is the operating system.
Yeah.
And in OS 10, the OS stands for operating system, so that gives us a clue.
Okay, that gives you a clue. So
instead of having Mac OS 10 or having Windows 10, you can have Linux.
I see.
Linux is a program. It's a special type of program because it doesn't rely on any other programs. Most programs you write have quite a lot of the hard work done for them by other programs running underneath.
Yeah.
But underneath, right at the bottom of the pile, there's this program called the kernel, which has got nothing else underneath.
Okay.
And that means it's quite hard to write that code because there's no one helping you with any of the stuff. You have to do it all yourself, and that makes things awkward.
Can you do you know why Linus decided to do this in the first place?
Yeah, so it's funny because it's become Linux is a massive thing now. It's worth
it's huge.
Billions of dollars, pounds.
Yeah.
It's responsible for the success of companies like Google, Amazon, not solely responsible, but without Linux, companies like Google, Amazon, and all the big companies would have had real trouble doing what they do. They run, Google has server farms that are like miles across, running thousands and thousands of computers, all of which have got Linux running on them. So it's this huge thing. It's responsible for a significant amount of the output of our economy, or it's vital for it at least.
So the thing with it is that the way that I look at it and the way that I've heard people talk about it in the past is that Linux is not perfect by any means, but it's far, far easier than writing your own stuff, and it's cheaper than having lots and lots of licensed Windows servers all over the place, and it's easier to manage than those things. So it's not a perfect thing by any means, but it's a good place to start, and to build up a big, like a server farm or something like that.
That's right, and we should talk a little bit about other systems that are like it, that it's kind of replaced. So anyway, you asked me a question which I was
Yes.
doing the opposite of answering.
Yes, why did he do this?
So I just wanted to contrast the fact that it's now such big business, it's so huge and important.
Yeah.
He did it for fun.
Okay.
And in fact, he deliberately did it in a way that wasn't going to be useful to many other people. So when he first started out, he did it as an experiment, not even into how to write an operating system, really. He just wanted to learn a little bit about how to write assembly language for the 386 processor.
Okay, which is an old processor, isn't it?
That may or may not mean much to you, but basically he wanted to do it. He wanted to do it as a kind of exercise to learn the absolute lowest possible level type of coding.
Machine code
on top of one specific processor. He wasn't interested in making it run on almost anyone else's computer except his own. I mean, that's not quite strictly true, but there are lots of different types of computer around, which he wasn't interested in doing. All he wanted to do was experiment with learning how to write code for this one particular processor.
Okay, can I just jump in there for a moment? So Linux, I was given to understand that Linux was based upon Unix. So, and there are different flavors of Unix. So we probably shouldn't muddy the water too much, but Unix has been around for a long, long time.
That's right. So,
and is Linux based upon those?
Yeah. So it didn't copy any of the code from Linux. It was actually at one point someone actually accused it of copying the code, but because it was all programmed out in the open. Yeah. You've got the full history. You can see exactly what people did. That's all tracked very carefully. So actually, when people accused them of copying code from other people, and they were able to prove that didn't happen. But it certainly is, the design of it. It certainly is based on this thing called Unix. So basically, back in the dawn of computing, there were these massive mainframe computers, and someone wrote an operating system for them called Multics, I think. Okay. And Unix is like a play on that. So Multics means multiple people can do things at the same time. So this was a radical idea at the time, that you could have multiple people could log into the computer and you could run lots of programs at the same time. And some researchers got hold of the first time they'd got hold of a kind of small computer instead of one of these massive ones.
Yeah.
And to play around with it, they needed an operating system just to be able to do stuff. So they started writing something which was kind of modelled on Multics, but they called it Unix, meaning like basically you can only do one thing at a time. Right?
Okay.
It's a play on words because actually it still is a multi-user operating system. It can still run multiple processes, but it's supposed to indicate this is kind of small and toy and not proper.
Okay.
Well, what happened is that Unix was so successful, it turns out trying to write small programs but getting them right ends up with very nice, useful systems that actually work well even on big systems.
Yeah. And the big players, some of them still produce Unix type systems, like say for example IBM. Presumably the Oracle still produce a type of Solaris because they acquired Sun quite a few years ago.
That's right.
HP presumably still produce some type of Unix-like operating system. So, that's right. And that's basically where Unix was, wasn't it? It was with the big players, and they
exactly. So it was
sell
Unix.
it.
Unix became this thing that you ran on your great big servers.
Yeah.
That was reliable. Known for being reliable, boring, and slow.
Yeah.
And then along came Mac OS and Windows, which were exciting and shiny, and you could have actual windows and things, and they looked pretty. And Unix was this just very old-fashioned, slow, but completely reliable system that you would run on servers that you wanted them never to go wrong. So what Linus Torvalds did was he thought, well, I want to have something. I like Unix because I've tried it out on these big machines, but I want to try it out on my home computer. So he was writing a system that worked the similar way to these Unix systems, but that worked on his home computer. So this 386 thing that I was saying, that was just an ordinary home computer at the time. So he did that just for fun, and he wrote just the really inner bit, the kernel bit. And then in order to actually do anything useful with the computer, you need a whole load of little programs that make up what we now call a Unix system.
Yes.
So where those programs came from was from someone who was much more interested in the big picture, who wasn't just having fun with a toy, but who actually thought that it's morally wrong that computer systems are not completely open and free and shared amongst people.
And who was that person?
That was someone called Richard Stallman.
Ah, no, I've heard of him.
And he started a project called the GNU Project.
Okay, I've heard of that as well. The
GNU Project wrote all these little tools that make up a normal Unix system. So in a Unix system, if you want to see
You're talking about
files,
Unix or Linux now?
Well, I'm talking about all these little programs are the programs you need in order for your system to work like Unix.
Okay.
But he wrote versions that we now use in Linux.
I see.
Because Linux now basically works exactly like a Unix.
Yeah.
There's actually a certification to say a system is Unix, and it costs like millions of pounds.
I bet it does. Yeah.
And I don't think they've ever done it for Linux, or maybe it doesn't pass. I don't know, because it's more modern. Like it's overtaken anyway.
Yeah.
I think technically Linux is not a Unix, but in practice it's very much like all those old Unix systems. Just
I've heard it referred to as a Unix-like operating system.
Yeah. I mean that's what that's trying to express. I think that it's probably not certified as Unix, but it is very much like it.
Okay.
Anyway, so along came the GNU Project, which was Richard Stallman and others, but especially driven by him at the beginning, and kind of philosophically very much driven by him, with this philosophy that no one should be allowed to sell you a computer without also giving you the code that runs it. So his printer went wrong, and he wanted to fix it, and he couldn't fix it because he didn't have the code. This annoyed him so much that he started an entire life's work of promoting and making up this idea called free software.
Okay.
Or open source, but he doesn't like the term open source because it doesn't express the freedom that he's all about. Anyway, so he and others wrote a C compiler, which is very, very important if you're going to have a world where people can write programs. The programming language they wanted to use to write those programs was C, and there wasn't a compiler. So you couldn't write C programs without using some software that wasn't free. So the first thing he did was he wrote a C compiler
Mm-hmm.
called GCC, which is still very popular and
Yep.
commonly used now. I mean,
I've
it's
heard of
massively updated since then. Yeah, it's one of the big C compilers. So if you're writing software for phones or small devices, you almost certainly will have used GCC at least until relatively recently.
Okay.
And then using that C compiler, that he was then able to write a whole load of other programs using the C programming language. And so the kind of things that these programs do, the simplest one I can think of is a program called ls. So basically, if you want to see what files are in a directory or in a folder, you open up the command prompt, which is where you can type commands into the computer.
Yep.
And then you type ls and press enter, and it makes a list of all the files in that directory. It stands for list, I think.
It does. Yes.
So it's programs like that, things that you wouldn't even really think of until you started thinking about what makes up your computer.
I see.
Those were written by the GNU project, and the GNU project really cared about freeing the whole world from the tyranny of proprietary software.
Yeah.
They still do, by the way.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of sympathy for their viewpoint. And meanwhile, Linus was writing basically a toy for fun.
Yeah.
And what ended up was, so the GNU project had its own project to write a kernel. In fact, it still does.
Okay.
And it still doesn't really work very well. They've been working on it for 20 odd years.
So they've been trying to write a competitor for Linux and haven't succeeded.
For the kernel part, yeah. So these days, the kernel is quite a small part of the whole system.
Okay.
They wrote a kernel called The Herd.
Okay.
Which was very innovative. It was a new way of designing an operating system kernel that a lot of people believed was kind of the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out it's really hard. So meanwhile, Linus and his friends were happily playing around with this toy called Linux, and accidentally it's kind of taken over the whole world.
Yes, it really has. I mean, it really has. I was just as you were talking then, I was thinking about some other things that run on Linux. And there's a multitude of different types of set-top box that run on Linux.
Almost all things like TV, stuff like that.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So Amazon's Kindle devices run on Linux. So they run on a different version of Android. So it's a modified version of Android. I don't think Mac OS is Linux underneath. I think that's not. Is that FreeBSD or BSD?
So the Mac OS that you run on your home computer Mac it's built on some code taken from FreeBSD and some other code taken from OpenBSD.
And the Next as well. I think that's
and the Next system. Yeah. The FreeBSD and OpenBSD are other Unix-like operating systems that are also open source or free software.
But they're not. They have nothing to do with Linux. Is that right?
That's right. But they actually were written by universities and people like that.
Isn't it the Berkeley?
Yeah, BSD stands for Berkeley Software Distribution.
That's it. Yeah.
So a lot of them came from some researchers at Berkeley who basically didn't think much about what permissions to give people. They just wrote the code and sent it around to their friends. They weren't interested in who's allowed to do what with it.
I see. Okay.
And that meant that there was a lot of confusion at the beginning about who was allowed to do what with it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Linux, after a couple of full starts, started using a license that was designed by Richard Stallman of the GNU project, which is where the stories come together.
They converge, yeah.
And that license, which we'll probably get onto if we do open source properly, was very clear that everyone could use it, and if you used it, you had to let other people use your changes to it, so that then the code all got shared around, and now everyone could see everyone else's code. Now,
so let's touch on the subject of Linux started out being offered for free, and anybody could use it and contribute to it if they wanted to. But some companies sell it, don't they? Do they sell the operating system, or do they sell it as a service? I'm thinking about people like Red Hat, for example.
Yeah. So Red Hat make quite a lot of money from. If you look at it. If you don't look too closely, it looks like they sell you a version of Linux called Red Hat Linux, which is it works in a similar way to the way Microsoft would sell you a copy of Windows, or Mac would sell you a copy of.
So they sell you a license, effectively, don't they?
But
because that's what Windows is. You can download Windows from Microsoft. You can install it, and you can use it for a certain amount of time. But eventually, it's going to ask you for a license.
Yeah, so the thing with Linux and everything that's under this GNU General Public License, which is the license invented by Richard Stallman for the GNU project, which Linux uses, the thing with that is that if you give someone else copies or sell someone else copies, you're allowed to sell them copies.
Yes.
But you also have to give them your source code. Instead of just the compiled code that actually works, you have to give them the code that kind of makes it up so that other people can make changes.
Okay.
So not only do you have to give them the code, you also have to let them give that to other people as well.
Right, which
so
obviously
part
Microsoft,
of the kind of social contract.
Microsoft don't do that, and nor do Apple.
So you're not allowed to. Yeah, if you get Windows from Microsoft, you're not allowed to change it.
No, that's right. Yeah.
But if you get Linux from someone, you explicitly are allowed to change it and share it with your friends. That's part of the kind of contract that they got Linux. Red Hat got Linux from someone else, right? And so when they get that, they're signing up to this contract that says you're allowed to do the same thing when they give it to you.
Okay, so when Red Hat, effectively charge for Linux, is the version that you get from them, are you allowed to change that if you want to, or is that a bit more closed?
You absolutely are allowed to change it, and you're allowed to give it to other people. There are restrictions there because you're not allowed to use their trademarks, so that makes it a bit awkward. But the fact is that legally you are allowed to do that, and you're definitely allowed to give copies to your friends and things like that.
Yeah.
I think without even changing any trademarks, because I think that wouldn't be a problem. I'm not sure about that. But there are some people who actually get the code from Red Hat, take all the trademarks out, and then put it on the internet free to download.
And that's called Fedora, isn't it?
It's not called Fedora. Fedora is a project that Red Hat themselves make, which is freely downloadable.
But there's other people that do that. So
there's another project called CentOS.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And CentOS is basically the same version of Red Hat Linux, but with all the trademarks taken out, and that is completely allowed. But because of the way the license works, because of this general public license, you're allowed to do that. Actually, making that slightly more complicated now is that actually Red Hat have now bought CentOS. So now they're giving away these people who were completely independent and giving away a copy of Red Hat Linux. Now actually Red Hat give that away themselves, so it kind of makes it less complicated in a way. But
so Red Hat give away is Fedora dead or is it?
No, there's Fedora as well. So Fedora is kind of it's aimed at people who don't mind quite frequent updates and sometimes things going wrong.
I see.
Whereas Red Hat Linux and CentOS are much more for businesses who are doing things where they don't want to upgrade too often.
So they are what would be known as long-term support releases.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the thing you get, the question that you got is, why would I pay money to Red Hat?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the answer is because they'll keep it running for you. They'll give you support and they'll fix problems when they happen and things like that.
So you don't have to have someone in-house to do those things for you.
Exactly, or they will help the person that you have got in-house, if it gets difficult.
Yeah, I could see how that would be attractive for a small business.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they make a lot of money from big business, I think, because big businesses like to have someone they can phone up when things go wrong.
Yeah.
So Red Hat are very profitable. Surprisingly, you would think, given that they're kind of selling something that you're kind of allowed to give away once you bought it.
But they're selling a service, aren't they, really?
Exactly, they are selling a service. And people trust them and see them as the experts. And one of the reasons people see them as the experts is because they write a lot of the code in Linux. So they do that kind of for free because other people can take the code that they add into the Linux kernel and they can use it in their distributions. And people do that all the time. So
Red Hat contribute a lot to the Linux kernel.
They do, yeah. There's a huge amount of code going into the Linux kernel every month. And actually, I was going to look that up before we did this, and I didn't. But there are literally thousands of people putting code into the Linux kernel every month. There's just ridiculous, enormous amounts of code. For someone who works writing code for a living like me, the speed of change in the Linux kernel is absolutely terrifying. If I work on a project where we probably make I don't know, 5 changes a day. Linux kernel has hundreds.
Wow.
And it's all done across the internet, coordinated by people. Some of them are working for free, some of them work for Red Hat, some of them work for IBM, some of them work for Canonical, although not so many from Canonical. And lots of other companies. I'm trying to think who else are big contributors.
Well, there's SUSE as well.
There's SUSE Linux, yeah. Microsoft are actually quite a big contributor to the Linux kernel, surprisingly.
Yes, because their new CEO, well, not new, he's been there for a while now, but the CEO that's there at the moment is very much a proponent of open source, isn't he?
Yeah, he's certainly making noises like that. The reason why Microsoft are putting a lot of code into Linux recently is Microsoft have this cloud product called Azure, where you can run virtual servers inside their big servers.
That's right.
And people really want to run Linux servers.
Yeah.
So even Microsoft had to kind of roll over and say, all right, we'll let you run Linux servers. So in order to make Linux run nicely inside their Azure servers, they've provided a lot of changes into Linux, which have been accepted by the guys who run Linux, even though kind of historically people saw Microsoft as an enemy of stuff like Linux.
Only because of the stuff that Steve Ballmer said.
Yeah.
He said some really aggressive. He said some really aggressive, nasty things about open source, but he's retired now, so it doesn't matter.
So there was because of this license which says if you sell me the code or give me the code, you also have to give me the source code so that you can change it as well.
Yeah.
So I can change it as well. People have described that type of license as being viral, or I think it was Ballmer who called it cancer.
He said it was like a cancer, yeah.
Because it kind of takes over. If you gather together your code along with code under this license, then your code also becomes free, or that was the concern. In practice, it's turned out that it's just a really nice way for companies who would otherwise be keeping everything secret and competing with each other to do something that's kind of mutually beneficial, right? So there's a lot of companies that make a lot of money from Linux.
Yeah.
And they all work together on it. And the reason why that works, in my opinion, is because of this kind of social contract saying, if you make changes and redistribute them, then you have to give away the code as well so that other people can use them too.
And is there anyone policing all of this?
There is and there isn't. So with most projects like Linux, there is a kind of central authority, but it's kind of social rules that make that the case.
Okay.
So Linus Torvalds still runs the Linux project 20 or 25 years later, which is surprising. And he's quite famous for it. He's also quite famous for being quite foul-mouthed,
He's quite rude,
bad-tempered,
yeah,
and nasty sometimes. And
I think he's famous for being a bit of a misogynist.
Yeah.
Which is no surprise in a male-dominated world of IT. I should think that he's not that unusual for being a bit of a misogynist in that world, but he is quite famous for being so.
He's accused of being a bully as well. So he's in this weird position where he was just a lone geek who put his code up on the internet and other people joined in. It turned out that he had the skills necessary to, instead of just writing code, coordinate these hundreds and hundreds of people are writing code and working together to do it. And there's no denying that has been a very successful project. But people have been concerned recently that some of the ways that he goes about it are not... he's always said that being rude and non-corporate was kind of necessary to the way he worked. And recently that's been called into question a bit more, and perhaps he's just rude. Perhaps it's not vital to be that horrible.
No, maybe not. But it has got the job done, hasn't it, over the years? It
has. That doesn't mean it was necessary, but it's hard to deny how successful it's been.
It's hard to say that. With hindsight, it's very hard to say if he'd been a nice guy and hadn't been rude and confrontational, if Linux would now be the success that it is. I just don't know the answer to that question, really.
Yeah, it is hard to say, and I suspect that probably I think it's certainly true that being absolutely true to your instincts about what's good code and bad code is necessary.
Yeah, it's very important, I think. I think particularly for something like...
it to be horrible.
Well, no, that's true. So maybe the being horrible bit is just what he is, but he's good at other things as well.
It's certainly true that he, even though there are some things that you might change about him, he's certainly been shown to have skills that are vital and effective in running this massive project. I mean, it is the biggest software project in the world.
That's incredible.
It's probably, in terms of lines of code and rate of change. And it's also...
That is absolutely incredible.
It's also, I would say, by my judgment, easily the most successful software project in the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of longevity, and
it's everywhere now.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Longevity and what you would call market penetration, if we can use that phrase. It's everywhere. It's I was reeling off some things that it's in: set-top boxes, ATMs, phones. Now I'm struggling to think of things, but also things that you wouldn't think of, like Internet of Things type things, like cameras and fridges, toasters, probably toasters.
So the only place where there are computers where there isn't Linux is your computer at home. Although obviously my computer at home, it does have Linux on it, but a lot of people have still got Windows or Mac. But as people start using Android tablets, and Android is actually kind of got more of the market now than the Apple tablets and phones.
Well, that's because Google.
Those are also based on it.
Google gave it away for free, didn't they, to third-party vendors, who could then put it on their hardware.
That's right. Yeah. So it's not just one company selling it. Although actually, it's pretty much just Samsung now. But anyway, that's a different podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So you asked a question about who's in control. I think something.
Yeah.
Like that.
So is there anyone policing it?
So the thing is that Linus Torvalds is in control, but if people became unhappy with him because of the way the license works, they can just make their own version. And in fact, most phone manufacturers, people like that, do actually make their own version, but they try and keep it as close to Linus's as possible, because it just gets annoying if you get too far away.
Well, yeah.
Because any changes you make, you have to keep up to date yourself.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as soon as someone gets annoyed with Linus and decides that they can do it better, they are totally free, because of the way the license works, to just make their own version. They can even give it a different name. And if people like it, they'll start using theirs. What they're not free to do is do that in secret. If they release the software and give it to customers, they also have to give away the code so that other people can benefit from it, and that's the way the license works.
And I could see, I can see why, back in the days of the absolute dominance of Microsoft, how open source could be seen as being a huge threat.
Yeah.
Because, Microsoft's whole business model at that time, and still at this time as well, is secrecy. And proprietary software, and along comes Linux, which says no, we don't like any of those things. In fact, we don't like them so much that you can change it. You're free to change it. You're free to contribute stuff.
Yeah,
yeah.
And it may not be for everyone, but it certainly is the case that fairly often on my computer at home, I am actually running a version that I've slightly changed myself.
Wow.
So I do actually make use of that freedom.
That's very cool.
If there was a bug for a long time in my kind of windowed environment where some of the windows wouldn't line up properly, so I just changed the code a bit and recompiled it, and then I was running that code on my computer, and I obviously put my changes up on the internet so that other people could find them.
That's most excellent.
In the spirit of sharing.
Yeah.
So it really does, that freedom. It really is available, and even if you don't write code yourself, the benefits you get from that are still quite easily accessible, because someone else will have done something like that, and they'll have put their version up, and you can get it. So it's not controlled by one person who decides what you get and what you don't get.
Yeah. So in our last tech talk, we talked about what is the internet made of, And you were talking about how it's made of basically computers like the one you have at home, only bigger.
Yeah.
Would you say that most of those are running Linux?
Absolutely. So the servers that run the internet are massively dominated by Linux and other systems like it. So we mentioned earlier FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and NetBSD is the other one, and those, by the way, are also open source under a slightly different license, which basically lets you do what you like.
Okay.
But yeah, they're all Unix-like, to use that phrase.
Yeah.
They're all open source and freely shareable. And Linux is one of the biggest players. I'm not sure whether it's the most common or not, but yeah, the internet runs on those open source operating systems like Linux, OpenBSD, FreeBSD, NetBSD.
Yeah, yeah.
Without it, we wouldn't have the internet, really.
That's amazing. So in the early days of the internet, I'm thinking back when when Yahoo was very dominant. So I'm talking about the late 90s. Was Linux prevalent then as well?
I think not. I think it was probably mostly Solaris, AIX, HPUX, and stuff
Okay,
like
so
that.
It's running on Unix, paid for Unix systems.
I think so.
In universities and things
sure,
like that.
But I think Linux was too young. But actually, interestingly, the internet kind of made Linux possible. So
Yes.
without the internet, people being able to share quickly across the world, it would have been very hard for these people to work together in the way that they did to build a big system.
I see. So the internet has been partly responsible for the massive success of Linux.
Absolutely. And then Linux has been responsible for the internet growing in the way it did. So companies, especially Google's a good example. Google, quite early on in their existence, built great server farms of literally thousands and thousands of ordinary desktop computers. Well, not that ordinary, but pretty much the same as what you get in the shop, with Linux on them. And if they'd had to pay license fees to a company for that software, they just couldn't have afforded to set up.
In fact, you can see one of their arrays at the Science Museum in London.
Really?
And it is just a bunch of, I think their early ones were Pentium motherboards.
Right.
Chained together with Ethernet cables.
Yeah. That's
it. That's all it was. There was nothing fancy about it at all. In fact, the technology at that time was pretty simple compared to now.
Yeah, I guess the code they wrote on top of it that does the magic searching
was very clever.
Was pretty cool at the time.
Yeah.
The other thing that we should mention is that you can have Linux on your computer at home, and there's at least one name we should mention in case people have heard it and it kind of connects with it, which is Ubuntu.
Oh yes.
Starts with a U, Ubuntu, which is actually a Linux distribution, like we were saying. So that's Linux kernel plus all the GNU tools plus all the programs that we're used to using, like the web browser, email program. What programs people use? Word processors, things like that.
Yeah.
So Ubuntu is one of the most popular distributions of Linux that you get for your computer at home. And actually, these days, it used to be that when you had Linux on your computer at home, it was quite nasty looking and hard to use. And these days, it's quite flashy looking and pretty easy to use most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I on the computer that I had before the one I have now, I had Ubuntu for quite a few years, and although it frustrated me sometimes, it didn't frustrate me any more than Windows ever did.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed using it quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have problems because stuff doesn't work. Like a particular. Some of the hardware in a computer just doesn't work, but you equally have that kind of problem with other operating systems. It's just that generally when you buy a machine from PC World or wherever, they've kind of ironed out those problems already, so it just works. Yeah. If you install Linux on your computer, you're kind of on your own. If something doesn't work, well then it doesn't work. There's
usually a great deal of help online if things aren't working.
That's right, and the Ubuntu forums and question and answer sites are very helpful for lots of information.
Excellent.
I forced my whole family to use nothing but Linux. I use Linux at home, I use Linux at work. I actually use all Ubuntu in all those different places.
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with Ubuntu.
Okay, we should probably wrap up there.
Yeah, we're getting a bit long.
And I could ask you the question, why is the world better for having Linux in it?
I think there's a lot of answers to that question. So
okay, well, have one. Let's have one answer.
Can I have two?
Yeah, go on.
Number one, it really powers the internet, and the internet is really good.
It is.
Number two, it's a really good example of the fact that not everything has to be driven by money. Right? So Linux is volunteers, and the companies caught on later, and the companies make money because of it, but they don't make money by locking it up and then doling it out to you piece by piece, because it already belongs to you. It belongs to us. It's a communal asset that we all benefit from.
All right. That sounds like the kind of thing our Tory government would like to destroy.
Yeah. Well,
I'm just saying, they'd see it as some kind of cash cow and thought, well, why can't we make money out of this? And then they try and do it, and it would just be chaos.
Yeah, but equally, I don't know why we're bothering, because we're all going to be dead soon when Trump gets in.
He's not going to win. It's not going to happen. That's my prediction. Actually, when we come back... No, the election won't have happened when we come back, will it? It'll be... I know it will.
When's the election? Early November, is it?
8th of November. So actually, our next podcast will be 2 weeks' time.
Well, listeners...
We can discuss the outcome. But he's not going to happen. He doesn't have enough votes in swing states for it to happen. In fact, the Republicans could lose some key swing states that they've held for about 30 years, which would be amazing.
Used the plural to describe our listener.
Well, yeah.
I won't make that mistake again.
No, don't do that.
I think we're done.
I think we are. Do some plugging.
If we missed some stuff out from this podcast, ask us questions on our blog. Yes,
please do, because we want you to ask questions so that we can answer you.
Okay, because we've taken ages, my plugging is just programming videos on YouTube, look at our About page, and play the Android game Rabbit Escape. Look on our About page. That's it for me. Yeah, me too. So check the About page. I present a radio show. It's all on the About page. Thank you very much. We have been the Good Robot Andys. Google for that. You'll find the About page by clicking About. Party on, Wayne. Party on, Garth.